So one of the reasons that we decided to do this is, you all have probably heard of this thing called Libra. We are here to offer some perspective, some conclusions that we have reached about Libra, but also about the broader ecosystem of technology and business, and some geopolitical conclusions. But at the same time, this is a place for you to have more questions probably and develop your own critical thinking. What you'll see is more of a debate. Nothing we say is Bible, but at the same time, we would like for you to take away some very interesting viewpoints and then develop your own conclusions about it. This is not the right one. Let's try this one.
Oh, are you trying to change the thing?
Yes.
No, that's not it.
Okay, well, I'll do it here while she brings the other one. So, Facebook Libra, a pipe dream or the next frontier? We believe, by the way, the genesis of this work is an article, somewhat of a white paper, if you will, that we have been writing. And by we, I mean it's Dr. Ben and Dr. Al here, that we have been researching on this for a while, and we have different point of views. We debate, we collaborate, and we will eventually publish this sometime soon. So you will see a lot of the points that we have been discussing. One of the conclusions we've reached is Libra basically now launches an arms race for private, company-based and consortium-based alternative currencies. What does that mean? We'll look in a little bit more. Libra establishes a clear threat to US dollar as the currency of the internet, as a national or a global reserve currency, which US dollar is today. But this opens the path to developing more private currencies, and it's a clear threat to US dollar. Regardless of their success or failure, they may fail, but the path is open. The race is on to establish the stable digital currency for the internet. And we'll talk about federal or central government's response to it. Now, federal governments cannot sit on the sidelines. They have had an initial shock that something like this could even happen in this world. After they absorb the initial shock, they have to now respond, and they will issue blockchain-based, cryptographically secured, sovereign, state-backed currencies. And the latest example of that would be the Chinese president's statement on not just backing blockchain, but also backing their own cryptocurrency, crypto yuan. So think about this. If China issues one, US will have to respond. So will have to Russia, so will Brazil, so will India, so will other countries. How does that game really then takes place? The bigger point here to see is that we believe native digital companies, which are essentially companies that are born out of the internet, the Facebooks, the Googles, the Apples, the Amazon, etc. of the world, are now investing in new engines of value exchange. We'll get into what those actually mean. And they leverage the closeness to the consumers, they leverage their large footprints, they leverage their last 20, 30 years of know-how on dealing with consumers on the internet, and they are now finally, after gobbling a bunch of other industries like publishing, like media, like retail, like travel, they're now threatening financial service incumbents. And that's a major threat to banks. It's a major threat to most financial service incumbents, and they're wondering how to respond to this space. Some of you have heard me talk about this. The year 1865, there was an act in the United Kingdom called the Red Flag Act, where it was said that if you see a locomotive, to operate a locomotive, it needs to have a crew of minimum of 3 people, one of which should be carrying a flag, a red flag, or a lantern in their hand as they cross the road, so that other people could know that there is a locomotive on the way. That is how we dealt with first regulation for cars. Just imagine that, 1865. So the point here is, we are now living in a regulatory environment, in a regulatory regime globally that may not be well suited or may not even be relevant for the technology-led evolution, what's being produced in the future. So there is a dire need to match regulatory aspects to what technologies can do. We the people. Seems like in our history as a society, as a global world, this idea of how we organize ourselves, who has the voting power, who gets to say what world we live in, is somewhat important. We've had a few revolutions around it. Here's a picture of the French Revolution of 1787 to 1799. Eventually, they adopted a document called Declaration of Rights of Man and Citizen in 1789, which determined how the three estates of the French society at that time, the nobility, the monarchy, and the bourgeoisie and the commoners, how will they interact with each other, who will have the vote, who will have the say. And it seems like this document was quite influenced by the American document from the 1700s, the Declaration of Independence.
Independence.
Right. So we have seen a lot of new innovative governance models in the blockchain/crypto space, and this is a continuation of the same. It is not just an innovation in technology, it's an innovation in governance and how we dictate the way we want to live in our societies. We look at that in a few different ways. One country's ban is another country's boom. The question is, did US lose by not having a friendlier regime, a regulatory environment for blockchain and crypto-based companies? So Libra set up their shop in Zug in Switzerland. Is there a loss of US competitiveness? That's a theme you'll see us talk about. Voting powers. One of the elements of Libra Association is that it's about 20 companies, and we'll look at more detail at the moment. And the idea is to grow it to about 100 companies and get the governance more distributed or decentralized, however you want to call it. And one of the reasons people are joining, or companies want to join the Libra Association, is that as they fulfill the obligations, they will get equal rights as Facebook to determine the journey of this blockchain network and this cryptocurrency. Decentralized versus centralized. The idea, as some of you are very well familiar with the space, you know that the original crypto asset, as I like to call it, Bitcoin, is almost fully decentralized, where now we're seeing movements toward more centralized form of governance in blockchain-based environment. And some would argue that even Bitcoin is not decentralized. There is hashing power is concentrated in a few countries and few groups. So there is this ongoing debate of decentralized versus centralized. Let's talk about private currency. It is not a new era. It is not a new thing in the world. There were, in the 1800s, companies and even railroads or banks, they could issue their own currency in the United States and even other places in the world. In the United States, it ended with the National Bank Act of 1863. It ended the Wildcat Bank period. Wildcats were how these banks were known at that time. Did you know that even today, there are about 4,000 private currencies? I'm not talking about cryptocurrencies. 4,000 private currencies in about 35 countries in existence today. So, the story is we used to have these private currencies. Municipalities had them, states had them, banks had them. We went to this whole central federal model of managing currency for about 200 years now, and now is the return of the private currency. And you'll see more and more discussion on that. Let's talk about the token itself. Libra claims that the token is going to be a stable coin. And their mechanism of doing that is collecting a bunch of different assets that underlie this particular currency. It functions more like a mutual fund in the US. So the question becomes, one, is that really stable? Two, is there opportunity for arbitrage? And we'll get into that in more detail in the panel. And then here's the broader question. In 1661, the first bank was formed, Stockholm Banco, in Europe, and it could give out banknotes. By 1664, the bank had to shut down because they had a bank run. They couldn't give people back their money. So we have lived through an era of bank runs. There have been bank runs in the United States. If you look recently, Greece had a bank run. India didn't really have a bank run, but there was demonetization, very similar aspect to people lining up on streets. lining up to ATMs, getting their currency, or trying to convert their own notes into new notes because the old currency has no value. So we've gone through a whole era of bank runs. Perhaps we've learned some lessons from it. Now we're talking about private currencies where a consortium is going to govern or be the central banker for this currency. Who's going to manage it? How does that governance look like? Ecosystems thrive just like in nature. So in nature, we have seen ecology being full of diverse organisms. We're seeing more and more of that in the business world. The stronger the connection between different companies, the stronger the ecosystem is. What we're seeing is the boundaries of firms are being blurred, and Dr. Ben would tell you that he made this statement in 1985 in a Harvard Business Review article. So I think it still continues to be true after 20-something years, that there is not a thing called competition anymore. More companies are collaborating, and they call it cooperation. And you'll see that in this consortium. You'll see that if you start looking for it, you'll see that more and more areas of business. It's a very strategic way of looking at business. You will also see that some of these consortiums are in jurisdictions that are more fertile grounds for innovation, and they threaten American competitiveness. This is just a quick view on who is part of the Libra Association, so you get a sense of all kinds of companies, the payment companies, the technology companies and marketplaces, venture capital companies, even nonprofits. So it has a very UN-like structure with companies from different parts of the world. And there have been very vocal exits from Libra recently, including MasterCard, including PayPal and Visa, because of the regulatory scrutiny that they have been receiving, and they have been threatened with more regulatory scrutiny if they get into Libra. One of the beacons of hope for me personally is digital identity. If you read the white paper, they talk about digital identity, the prerequisite to financial inclusion. The internet does not have an identity layer. We have been struggling to create an identity layer with different kinds of formats till today. If Libra happens to be the one to create it, that might be the most adopted digital identity layer. There are pros and cons to that. But the fact that we are looking for the answer with digital identity so that we can get more unbanked and underbanked people into the fold of banking infrastructure. And that's a theme you'll see a lot in the white paper. The question is, do we believe those claims by Facebook or Libra? Are they really doing it for getting the unbanked and the underbanked? And then the bigger question regarding Facebook is, what happens to financial privacy of consumers? If you've been watching the hearings on the Hill, Facebook's being dinged for that. Facebook does not have a good reputation. So are we ready to submit our financial future more than that we have already to companies like Facebook? Blockchain architecture. So very quickly, Libra itself, the blockchain network, is a permission-based but public blockchain, which is a very interesting architecture. In my opinion, that has more chances of adoption, of global adoption, but there are people who would disagree. There are people who would say only public blockchain should exist or only permission-based private blockchain should exist. We can have that debate at some point. The other interesting part is that they have created a new programming language that allows an ecosystem of developers to code in that language and hence create more applications. Very similar way that Facebook had expanded from just being an app for connecting with people to now a whole platform with slew of services within it. Libra wallet needs a mention. It's a wallet for storing Libra at the moment, Libra cryptocurrency. But their plan or their intention is to expand that capability into storing multiple cryptocurrencies. And to me, if you look at the footprint that Facebook brings, that could be just a very impressive inflection point for adoption of cryptocurrencies globally in the world. If you all got a free wallet dropped into your Facebook, you're more likely to use it. So to end this, can this be a reality? There are a few perspectives. One, will governments allow it? Two, if there is no regulatory shift, if there are no new regulations created globally, which is a onerous task to begin with, can this even be anything practical? Will they even achieve their vision? Will it end up becoming like a PayPal or a Bitmo for all practical purposes, right? Is Facebook the right company to lead it? Because of the baggage that they bring with them, was it the right choice? Maybe if it was some other company, maybe Apple. How do you feel about Libra now if Apple was the company leading? I also feel that this is just the beginning. Most other companies, including Amazon, including Apple,